Fear and the paranormal go hand in hand. It's highly unlikely that you'll speak to someone who investigates the paranormal, or indeed someone who's been on a ghost hunt or even walked through a graveyard at night, who won't tell you that they haven't felt that sensation of bristling around their neck or a shiver along their spine. Oftentimes the paranormal is investigated in the dark, and so it makes sense that sensory deprived we'll hear those footsteps or those whispers that may not even be there. However, the question comes in terms of justification. How far is our fear justified? Is the paranormal dangerous? My name is Laura, and if you enjoy this video, then you might just enjoy some of my others, so please go ahead and subscribe for more of the paranormal. Now let's continue. I've been investigating the paranormal for many years. Primarily an armchair researcher, most of my work can be found over on my YouTube channel, The Paranormal Scholar, which comprises essay-like videos that discuss cases and phenomena. However, I do also do my own personal research in the field and have done so for many years as well. In particular, I've worked with other people who are much more experienced than I am, people who are psychic mediums or paranormal investigators, monster hunters, all those sorts of things. And I'm quite sure that all of them will have stories to tell in regards to fear in the paranormal. I myself have, of course, experienced fear, and not just me personally, but having witnessed it secondhand. I've seen somebody be physically sick because they were so emotionally overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere of the allegedly haunted house in which they were in. Back when I was filming for my documentary film In Search of the Dead in 2017, a friend of mine and Eric's, who was actually helping us on a couple of investigations that we were shadowing, he too became so fearful, so emotionally overwhelmed after seeing what he described as a tall grey figure walking amongst the graves in a graveyard, that he actually had to remove himself from the investigation.
So like 5 minutes ago, me and Martin was just scouting the place, doing pictures and with a flash, see if we could pick any orbs up. And Martin said he saw something like at the corner of his eye, like a tall greyish figure. I saw the same thing walk past about my height, like 6'3", 4", just go past the grave and then disappear. And it felt like I didn't feel safe down there. I felt like something was going to happen. So I walked back, looked at the picture and noticed. I went to show Martin the picture, and then that's when it all came over. I felt, well, that someone was sitting on my chest.
He had physical symptoms, the feeling of pressure on his chest, to such an extent that it was no longer good, no longer safe, quite possibly, for him to remain in the investigation. And so there is this line between fear and actual justified danger. At what point does the paranormal cross this line, or indeed does it ever cross that line? In the paranormal, we hear so many stories of people being physically affected by things that they experience, whether that be headaches, minor symptoms like that, or even receiving touches and scratches from something like a poltergeist, to right down the other end of the spectrum, demonic possession, where an unseen entity is supposedly able to take control of our body and lead us to do things that are quite possibly very dangerous to ourselves indeed. When I started paranormal research, I admit that I didn't really know what to make of these stories, and in all things paranormal was largely very skeptical of such experiences. As I said, when you're in the dark or you're in a location that you have been told is haunted or oppressed by a diabolical force, it's very easy to imagine things that might not be so. There was one particular occasion when I was very, very scared, and I was actually by myself doing a solo vigil in an old Victorian hospital and workhouse. I actually did this when I went investigating with Amy and Jared from Amy's Crypt, and I was alone in a corridor on the top floor. Now everyone else, in fairness, they were not supremely far away, they were on the same floor, but I was sat by myself. And earlier in the day, when we were led around the building by the gentleman who owned it, he had told us that in the room just over from where I was sat, that there was supposedly a dark male presence. Now, I did not for a single second feel that dark male presence, but when you are sat alone in a dark corridor by yourself, you start to think, can I feel this dark male presence? And as I sat there calling out and holding a solo vigil with the intention of communicating with the spirit of a little girl who was said to be trapped on this top floor, I actually had to just close my eyes after a bit, because I couldn't even bear, even though I was in the dark, I couldn't bear to keep them open because I was that scared. Now that was purely a scary situation. It was not dangerous, because I knew even in the moment that none of my fear, based on what I was actually experiencing around me, was actually justified. But it came from a genuine place, because I was in a situation that was sensory deprived, unusual, and new to me.
Is there a little girl here? Can you make the machine speak? Is there a little girl here? Is there not a little girl here?
And so that's largely how I went into the paranormal, thinking that the greatest danger was the danger that we posed ourselves inside our own minds. And yet over the years, I've had one too many experiences, either personally or, as I said before, witnessing other people, to maintain this belief and have questioned whether the paranormal can be dangerous. Now, I want to preface this by saying that, on the whole, most paranormal experiences that I've had have been overwhelmingly positive, and even those experiences that have caused me to be fearful, I know even in the moment, is largely due to the fact that I'm in the dark or in a strange place, or that it's just Eric and myself, and the situation could potentially escalate out of control to unimaginable or wildly imaginative scenarios. But there have been occasions where, and funnily enough, these occasions, even though they are possibly what you might call dangerous, seem to have less fear attached to them than the ones which are frankly not dangerous. So allow me to explain. Last year, I was helping a very good friend of mine on a house case. My friend is a psychic medium, and whatever you may think of people who profess such mediumistic abilities, he puts himself out there to help individuals who experience paranormal happenings, inexplicable happenings in their home. He is, you could say, a last resort for people who live in fear in the one place that is supposed to be not fearful, their home. And so on this occasion, I was helping him with such a case, and largely to see what sort of things he did in such a scenario. And I was in the upstairs of the house with Eric, and we had just been doing a calling out vigil, if you like, using various pieces of equipment, including investigative apps such as Ghost Tube. And some of the responses that we were getting on that were quite violent in nature, if you will. So in particular, and this was when Eric and I were standing talking with my friend Richard, we had the words scratch come through Ghost Tube. And This, in the moment, made Richard stop and just, scratch, as if he thought there was something significant to the word, but he never said anything more than that. Later that night, once we had finished the house case, were no longer in the home and most certainly were away from the family who were living with this activity, he turned to me and he said, "Do you remember when the word scratch came through?" And I did. And he said, "Well, at that moment, I felt myself be scratched." And then he proceeded to show me on his skin 3 long red scratch marks. And this wasn't in the scenario of the house case anymore. There was no audience to impress. There was no cameras. There was no reason for this to be anything other than a genuine happening. And this was also around an hour after the event itself, and yet the scratches on his skin were raised and red and very much physical. And he said that that was caused by the entity, the negative entity, which resided in that family home. Now, that was my first real moment of seeing something that could be described as dangerous, some form of harm, even if it wasn't chronic or lasting, but harm, physical harm, had been caused to a mortal body, allegedly by unseen means. So that was my first experience. And I trust my friend Richard 100%. I know that if he said to me those scratches came about on his body inexplicably, then they did. Even if there was some natural explanation, for him it was inexplicable.
Our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
And so that moment really made me stop and think, is it possible for the paranormal, whatever that may be, the other side, ghosts, some kind of unconscious construct of ours, is it possible for it to cause a physical effect, a dangerous effect on our bodies? In terms of my own experiences, even though I have been investigating in the field on and off for many years, aside from being made to jump by strange sounds and things like that, fear is normally kept to quite a minimum. I would say that, well, anybody has a fear response, but on the spectrum of fear response, I am probably down the lower end of reactive. I certainly don't think I've ever ran away from a situation, but I have been scared. Have I felt myself to be in true and justified physical danger? Now, I would say that that is a much rarer feeling to have. However, there is one time, somewhat recently in fact, where I also experienced what I will describe as physical harm, okay? And that sounds much more sensational than the experience actually was for me. So earlier this year, I was doing quite a bit of in-depth exploration in regards to the Estes Method, which is a method of alleged spirit communication where you sensory deprive yourself visually and also audibly by wearing headphones which give you a feed of white noise. And this can be pure white noise, static, or it can be of a ghost box which skips through radio stations at a fast rate. So I was experimenting with this at home, and in particular during one session I was it seemed being led somewhere else. That sounds very vague and very mysterious, but it's very difficult for me to describe. So I was being shown things in a trance-like state regarding the murder of a young woman. And it seemed from my responses that I was actually going somewhere else, even though I was physically at home, lying down, being fed this input. So there I am in this trance-like state. And Eric is acting as the questioner. He is giving me questions which I can't hear, with the intention that I or a spirit, an unseen entity of some sort, will feed me the answers via the audio that I'm listening to. And we were getting answers and seemingly relevant responses. And the session had been underway for quite some time, and I began to remark about a pain in a leg. And at the time, Eric assumed that this was information that was being fed by a spirit. Perhaps someone had died and their leg had been hurt, of that sort of a nature. However, the session ultimately came to an end with myself waking up because it was my leg which was in pain. And I thought that perhaps I had been doing the Estes session for a while, that maybe my leg had gone to sleep. But it did feel more than that. It felt hot and slicing and stinging. So the pain was actually so great that I immediately uncovered my leg because I wanted to look at my skin. And before my eyes, a scratch appeared on my skin. It became raised and red, and I saw it develop like an image on a screen or a photograph, a Polaroid after it prints. I saw it develop into being on my skin, and it was a single long red line. And I had never ever experienced anything like that before. And in that moment, and indeed since, I can only attribute that to having been caused by that session, by me indeed potentially going somewhere in astral form, in spiritual form, and retrieving information, or a spirit being doing that to me, or even my own body. Potentially I'm having this very overwhelming emotional response, fear response, that my own body, through an adrenaline rush or something like that, causes a physical mark to manifest. And so my leg actually hurt quite strongly for the next couple of hours until I went to sleep that night, even if the mark itself, the red line itself, only lasted for 5 to 10 minutes, after which it faded. But the feeling remained, and even the very next day, for most of the day, the pain was also there. This odd feeling on my leg of a scar, a shadow of a pain, if you like, was there all the next day. Now that, for me, is the closest to danger or physical harm I think that I have got to in regards to paranormal research.
Love. Listen. Oh, my leg. Here. Be careful.
Should we end this communication? Okay.
Oh,
Safe word, Kangaroo?
yeah, and my leg hurts.
Ah, that was your leg, okay. What the hell?
Oh, my leg hurts.
Yeah, you okay? Yeah, because I thought it was what you were hearing.
But just because I went to sleep or something?
Yeah, you kept saying your leg hurts, but I thought it was like, oh, that. You okay?
I got a scratch on it. It's getting more red the more I look at it.
Okay.
Well, that was not good. Look at that.
Now, of course, talking about such things naturally leads to the question of, should you investigate the paranormal if things like this can happen? And this video is by no means a way to scare you off paranormal investigation or to scare anybody off. I think that many things can be dangerous, and overwhelmingly my experiences with the paranormal have not been dangerous, have not even been scary. There are many times when things have been scary, and if they are scary, they last momentarily. And if you can retain composure of yourself, you're all the better for it. Fixation on negativity, I think, is unhealthy in all things, and we have to be wary of that sort of thought process becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. I think that the paranormal today is a very good example of this, in that demons are everywhere. There is a fixation on negativity, particularly on diabolical influence, and so you do tend to see that presented as a paranormal trope quite often, whereas from my experience, at least, the paranormal is very different from this. In this way, I think it's important that as consumers of paranormal content, we hold ourselves to account, in the sense that we don't always expect paranormal investigators to present dark and diabolical and dangerous content, as there is that risk of them then feeling as though they need to invent such dangerous content in order to satisfy their audience. But on occasion, there are moments, such as what I described about being scratched myself. Yes, it does cross that line from unjustified fear to potentially justified fear. All of this said, I do acknowledge that there are times when things are genuinely fearful, and I don't want to dismiss anybody's experience and say that it's not okay to be scared. Of course it's okay to be scared, and in the paranormal, trusting gut instinct plays such a massive role. After all, the purpose of fear is to keep us safe. It's a flight or fight response. And so if you are an investigator, or you're experimenting with wanting to have your own experience of the inexplicable, and you feel scared and feel as though you need to remove yourself from the scenario that's provoking that, I think you 100% absolutely should, if you feel that you have to keep yourself and everyone else around you safe. At the very least, you could even try and change up the energy, bring a different mindset to the scenario than allowing it to spiral down into a place where it really shouldn't go. I think that the paranormal is actually very, very different from what most people would have you believe. Most experiences that someone will have will be benign, or positive, or humorous. It really does cover the whole spectrum of emotion. And more often than not, you as an individual experiencer, because we've all had experiences, even if we dismiss them, you as an individual experiencer know much more what the paranormal is than a lot of so-called experts or investigators, because it is subtle. And it doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be dangerous. It can be scary, it can be dangerous, but so can anything. So don't let fear hold you back if you want to investigate. And don't feel as if you have to fall into being fearful in order for the paranormal to be interesting. The paranormal is far more interesting than that. And if you do have a fearful experience, or indeed an experience that causes you physical harm, as difficult as it may be, try and stay calm and just see where it takes you without succumbing to fear. But all of these are just my opinions, influenced by my own personal experiences. Perhaps you've had an experience of the paranormal that was very dangerous, or also perhaps you've had an experience that was very positive and uplifting. Go ahead and share them in the comments below. We're all learning here, and I really do want to provoke discussion. So go ahead, share your experiences, and if you enjoyed my thoughts and found them valuable or interesting in some way, I would very much appreciate a like and a subscription from you so that I can see you in the next video. Thank you.